as you know, most South African newspapers were either, they didn't like the idea of bombs, all of them, of the established newspapers. So they didn't like the idea of MK and the ANC. But the English-speaking newspapers were slightly sympathetic, only slightly. They carried the reports. But the Afrikaans newspapers were very anti the ANC. The English newspapers were anti-ANC, but said that government had to address black people's grievances. So they reported factually on the trial, which still meant that people got to hear, which is very important. They tried to be as factual as possible, so they would report what Mandela said in court. Right? The speech from the doc. Now the interesting thing is, what he said in court could be reported. But while he was free, he could not be quoted because he was a banned person. But a court record can be published. At that time, the Rand Daily Mail, and I think the Cape Times. But the Afrikaans newspapers didn't publish anything. Like Rapport, Die Burger, Beeld, Volksblad, my language newspapers. So that was very sad. But much more important was the overseas newspapers carried everything in support of the ANC. The Guardian, The Observer, the New York Times, those sorts of newspapers. The Chinese newspapers, the Russian newspapers, the European, like German newspapers and so on, all carried articles in support. Then radio was very important. The radio was very important. And does anybody know when South Africa got television for the first time? 1976. 1976 was the first year in which we got television. But the rest of the world had television since the 1940s. Right? And the apartheid government used to say, no, if we give television, then people will want freedom. And it's very interesting that in the year that they had television, we had the Soweto uprising. And the first time I saw anything about Soweto was on television. So they were a little bit right. So overseas television had interviewed Mandela and them. There's an interview of Mandela when he was underground with BBC. I don't know if you saw it in the documentary. There was when he was younger, before he went to jail. There was an interview with him in one of those things. So there were interviews of that nature done. But because they couldn't give interviews when they were in prison, people like Winnie Mandela, Albertina Sisulu, and so on gave interviews to overseas media. And pictures were taken. Photographs were very important. And you'll remember the most beautiful pictures always of. Who's the most beautiful picture always of? Winnie. Yeah, even gay men think she's beautiful.
I used to ask myself, where do they get the pictures when Mandela was young? Maybe they're lying.
Yeah. No, Mandela's pictures, young pictures, they are real. The only picture, there's only one picture of him in prison, which was with him sitting, but you can see it's him with Walter Sisulu. But no pictures were allowed of them once they were in prison. So that was an illegal picture that someone took. There's one other thing, two other things that I will say is important when it comes to media, is the movement's own media. Our own media. Our t-shirts, our pamphlets, our videos. It's like that pamphlet. Sorry, I'll show you many more pamphlets that we can find. You must research them. And then They're the records that we must keep. So, what happens when you guys have meetings? You keep minutes, right? The records of the organizations is important. When you run campaigns, you produce leaflets and posters and books. You must keep them because they're very important for the next generation of people who struggle. They're vital for the next generation of people, both as history, both of the things that we succeed in and the things that we fail in. So documentation, the research you guys do, the organizations do, not only important to study, but also important to pass on and to keep properly, to store. Because knowledge is
Power.
the most powerful possession that any one of us have.